Hello, hello, and welcome to Art Pop Talk. I'm Gianna.
And I'm Bianca.
Well, Bianca, we've got a lot of visuals to cover, from Michelle Obama to Lady Gaga to J-Lo's Chanel, and the fact that we can now say Madam Vice President.
Oh my gosh, I know. On top of all the visual stimulation of the past week, today we are also talking about the art market and art auctions.
That's right, we definitely are. We've also got some financially related art news, and later on we're discussing the 2018 documentary, The Price of Everything.
With all this ground together, Gianna, let's get into it.
Okay, so let's just get into the inauguration of it all.
Truly. I feel like so much happened in the past week. I feel like Wednesday of last week, I just didn't stop looking at my phone. I looked at Bernie memes for like 12 hours straight.
These are moments. I just love the internet so much. Like, I'm so scared of the internet, but when you all like pull up with shit like that, game over. So good. Literally all the ladies of the inauguration were looking so fabulous, so stunning, so powerful, so gorgeous. I cannot handle it. Still not over it.
Such jewel tones. I can't. I was also really excited to hear about all of the different fashion designers. I think it's really cool that someone like 𝙗𝙧𝙧𝙚, who designed Michelle Obama's outfit, has been kind of blowing up the past week. I mean, Michelle just looked stunning. When Michelle came out, it was honestly straight fire. Gianna, what was your favorite look, favorite outfit out of all the outfits of the day?
I mean, obviously it was Gaga's. It's always going to be Gaga. Like, which is like the most biased opinion I'm ever going to have in my life. But I mean, she looked absolutely stunning. Mockingjay on fire.
Did you really think it, did you really get a reminder of Mockingjay vibes when she came out? Did you think it was Hunger Games-esque or no? Because I kind of didn't really agree with that comparison.
No, I just let TikTok dictate my opinions for sure. It wasn't until the aftermath I was like, oh, I mean, like, sure, she's got like a big ass bird pin going on,
yeah.
But no, it was just another like outrageous Lady Gaga look.
Truly. But what did you think of J-Lo's outfit, her Chanel? Did you like it?
It was fine. I mean, obviously she's one of the most gorgeous women to ever walk the planet, and she'll look gorgeous in whatever she wears.
Literally anything.
In general, trying really not to be like biased towards like the person Coco Chanel, but just like the aesthetic of the brand itself as high fashion, Chanel is not my favorite. So, you know, it's always going to have that kind of like preppy like undertone to it.
Yeah.
So it was okay.
It was okay. She looked beautiful. What did you think of the Let's Get Loud edition?
I took a little pause. Actually, my favorite thing about the inauguration was whoever was the camera person was so fucking shady, man. I loved it. Like, that person needs to be paid, like, in full. Like,
I hear Emmy Award nominee.
Ooh,
inauguration camera person. Like, who panned to Mitch McConnell when they said a wretch like me.
Oh my god. It was just the most like poetic cinematography I've ever seen.
No, it really it really was. And I just think it's so incredible. Like, going back to this, I know on the podcast we are not necessarily a political podcast, but I feel like we can't disregard that intake of images that we are getting really for a while now, but the past weeks and months, and seeing that and having everyone just make that instant connection from words to images, and it was just it was fantastic. The whole thing, first of all, the Bernie memes, I'm obsessed. I haven't laughed so hard for so long. in the longest time. And you know what, Gianna? I feel wonderful. I feel absolutely wonderful. And just for a moment, just for like a few hours about the state of our existence. And Mr. Bernie Sanders like helped me get through the day. And I just kept saying all week and all weekend that it was just, for me, it was such a moment of waking up every day for the past 4 years, being like, okay, watch the news. What did he tweet? What's on Twitter? What happened? And then waking up really, I mean, Thursday morning, the day after inauguration. And you know what? The only thing I saw was a sweet old man wearing mittens from a local vendor in at the inauguration. It was perfect. That's what waking up is now, is Bernie Sanders memes. And I know we have a lot of work to do, and this is not in any means saying, okay, great, everything's fine now, because it's absolutely 1,000% not. But just personally, I felt like a sigh of, I'm happy for the internet today, and I'm happy for Twitter today, because I can look at Bernie Sanders art history memes, and it was great.
What a great moment for politics and museum culture to merge together. Like all the museum memes with Bernie in gallery spaces was so good.
Prime. Also, I mean, the last thing I'll say is I don't want to leave out the amazing Amanda Gorman, who is the youngest poet to perform at the inauguration. She also did a lot of coverage before the event with CBS This Morning, and they were talking about a ring that was given to her by Oprah in the shape of a bird cage that was meant to represent Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings. So I thought that was just another cool kind of like visual marker, and like picking up on those little symbols, like those little icons that we might find in a photograph or an art history painting, and thinking about all these different people and time periods coming together. And she was stunning and beautiful, and her words were amazing. But I thought in terms of visual culture, that was another really significant marker of the day. On top of Inauguration Day, we also got some big news from the Guggenheim last week. I don't want to leave this out. A while ago, we talked about the longtime chief curator who unexpectedly left the Guggenheim last year. They have now hired Naomi Beckwith. She's currently the senior curator of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, and she will be the first Black deputy director and chief curator at the Guggenheim, and she will begin there in June. So congratulations, Naomi. I'm so excited to see all of the amazing things that she does at the Guggenheim.
Okay, well, are we ready to get into some art news?
Yes, absolutely. This week's art news fits in really well with our overall topic for today, so I'm really excited about it. I actually first saw this piece of art on TikTok, and I wasn't exactly sure what it was until Gianna shared with me an article about this installation located in Vanderbilt Hall in New York City's Grand Central Terminal. Natural Light Beer is behind this work, what is being called, quote, the most expensive piece of art in the world. They created this piece in an effort to call attention to the rising cost of a college diploma and the impact of college debt. The artwork, entitled Da Vinci of Debt, was created using 2,600 authentic physical diplomas provided by real college graduates across the country. And the way this piece works, it reminds me of something from Harry Potter, kind of where Harry gets his letters and they're all like swirling around him. It's a cinematic experience, just like this piece is. It's a real experience. There are 2,600 pieces of paper. Many are suspended in midair, almost in a type of like tornado's wind. There's this cylindrical appearance to the work as the pages float upward from the stacks of paper on the floor next to a desk and chair. The design is, quote, meant to illustrate both the scale of the crippling debt crisis while also alluding to the chaotic impact college debt creates for those who are burdened by it, end quote. An adequate representation of my constant feelings. 𝙗𝙖𝙧 of Debt celebrates the return of the Natural Light College Debt Relief Program, which launched in 2018. Each year, the program provides $1 million to help people who are weighed down by the burden of debt. Daniel Blake, vice president of value brands at 𝙗𝙧𝙧𝙧, said, quote, "The art world is filled with an absurd price tag that most people find impossible to justify. That's why it made the perfect medium for this campaign. It's a very fitting analogy for the outrageous cost of attendance at a typical four-year college. Through 𝙗𝙧 of Debt, we hope to inspire action around the college debt crisis and drive more fans to enter for a chance to have the Natty College Debt Relief Program pay down their student loans." So we're about to get into some of the absurdity of the cost of art. For example, like the banana, which, come on, it's brilliant, the banana, sold for $120,000. But while some values on art seem inexplicable, the value of 𝙗𝙧 of Debt is derived from the average total cost of a four-year college education. The result is a piece of art that's valued at $470 million, making it theoretically the most expensive piece of art, even more costly than Salvator Mundi, a 600-year-old Da Vinci painting that sold for $450 million in 2017.
I almost want to be transparent or like brave enough to be like, should we share how much student debt we're in?
I think we should. I think it's important to talk about the reality of college debt.
Yeah. And this is something that, I mean, it's always on my mind.
Yeah.
Because it's terrifying. You know, now that I am graduated, it's something I do really obviously have to think about now.
Yeah.
Because I have to start paying that back in about 6 months. And Bianca, I was talking to you about this earlier, how I was feeling relatively good about where I was at with it, having been able to save up a lot of money like during this time after graduation. I know that I am so fortunate to have had the opportunity to go to college in the state of Oklahoma, but even with that, all of our living costs, because Bianca and I both supported ourselves through school and had to take out loans because of that, I am a little bit over $10,000 in debt for my 4-year BFA degree.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how all of these things just weirdly align in your life. And I feel like I am with the conversation around this piece, with our idea for the topic today. And I don't know, just other weird, like personal things, I guess, that I've been thinking so much about. College debt is like, the thinking about it is in itself physically and mentally crippling. It's terrifying to think about. And I have just over $51,000 of student debt. If you guys are interested in this, I definitely would love to hear from the listeners, or, you know, anyone who is dealing with this, but especially in the arts and humanities field. I feel like there's a lot of similar problems that we experience with funding and money across the board. So I'd be really interested to hear, obviously, from other people in our field. But it's, yeah, that's that's where we are.
Yeah. All right, so let's get in today's Art Pop Talk. We're going to ask that very difficult question, and frankly, one we're not sure we can give you a satisfying answer to. Why does art cost so much? We're going to think about the cost.
Why did my college education cost so much?
Why does being a breathing, living human being cost so much? Honestly, I wanted to buy this stupid smoothie the other day because now I have a chronic pain condition, so I have to eat a lot of foods that are anti-inflammatory, and there are not a lot of options here in Oklahoma, folks. And so I wanted to buy the smoothie. It was $15 for a smoothie. I have to work 2 hours to afford that, yo. I was like, no, thank you. Oh my goodness. So we're going to think about the cost of art historically as it's commissioned, look at the history of auction houses and how the art market functions. All of this in mind, we'll be ending with a discussion of HBO's 2018 documentary, The Price of Everything. And then you are all in for a little surprise guest later on in the second half of the episode, so stay tuned for that. So Bianca, do what you do best. Offer us a good little overview. Go for it.
Thanks, sis. Art markets can be divided into a primary and a secondary market. The primary market is where works are first sold after they were created by an artist. The secondary market deals with any subsequent resales, whether through a dealer's private transaction or at auction. Auctions are often regarded as the only viable benchmark for an object's worth, LOL, as the price formation process can be openly observed and results are generally accepted as objective. So, quite obviously, here lies a central problem in the market and placing a value on art, in that more often than not, the price in the secondary market can be quite arbitrary, which is fueled by characters in that line of work who buy and sell. However, Gianna, I am curious if you can speak to the primary market from where the art is first bought directly from the artist, because I think in that line, we can start to narrow down the cost of something and how an artist sells their own work and creates a price and a living.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of a really specific example of this, it makes me kind of defer to things like arts festivals. It's kind of funny because I've been told quite a few times things in regards to specifically my prints, how art festivals will totally be your jam for your prints. You know, that will be a good market for your art. And that's also not to say that those people who have said those things to me are wrong, because I don't think that they are, but I also think that when you make prints like I do that can have that kind of historical undertone, funny undertone, feminist undertone, they are catering to a specific group of people, but that also doesn't mean that it isn't, as we like to say, highbrow art and can't exist in a more formal gallery space.
Right.
But I think that's also where you get put into specific categories based on your medium as well. And that's kind of the weird thing about printmaking, just because they're made to be multiples. That is also just a good market for it, because you want to be selling those multiples over and over again. And that is a really great market for it. But that's just one of those weird things where the medium of your art can kind of start to place you into weird categories as you're starting out as an artist. And then obviously it's up to you to kind of go from there. It also depends on the market. You know, you can only control so much, but there are these starting places for certain arts. And I think ceramics and print kind of fall into that same categories, because it's things that can be kind of reproduced and still handmade and still original, but reproduced in that different way, if that makes sense. That was a little bit of a tangent, but
no, that was good. According to Oxford Art Online, auctions have existed since classical antiquity, although they fell into disuse by the Middle Ages. During the Italian Renaissance, the patronage of art flourished, but there was hardly a type of liquid market for portable art objects of the type that defines art markets as we know them today. They write, quote, "A key historical moment in the formation of such liquid markets for portable objects was the emergence of a collector base within the mercantile middle class of Flanders, Holland, and some parts of Italy during the 17th century. A network of private dealers and auctions now created synergies, which allowed for a growing market of mostly paintings. However, in Protestant Holland, art markets could not openly operate as a form of luxury consumption," end quote. However, we then have a man named Edmé François Gersaint, who changed this way of thinking in the 1700s. 𝙗𝙧𝙧𝙚 was a French art dealer who built the idea of auctions as a marketing tool that transformed art markets into venues of luxury consumption for a general audience. He was the first to conceive, for instance, like lavishly illustrated auction catalogs that inspired this fantasy for his buyers, which is a point that I think is particularly interesting in comparison to what we saw in The Price of Everything with the woman from Sotheby's who is out showing those potential buyers the catalog. And throughout the course of the documentary, most of the time when we see her, she's kind of flipping through that catalog as such an extensive marketing tool and in fact create that fantasy and carries on that same legacy. In the mid-18th century, we also see London emerge as that market competitor with auction house companies starting out like Christie's and Sotheby's. In 19th century Paris, we see the rise in Impressionism. And of course, in 1863, we have the Salon des Refusés, where the French Salon rejected works of Gustave Courbet, Edouard Manet, Camille Pissarro, leading them to exhibit the, quote, Salon of the Refused. Now we know that the Salon of the Refused became more popular than the artists who were shown in the original Salon. And this led people like the American painter Mary Cassatt to act as a type of, I don't know if tradeswoman is the right word, or spokesperson for Impressionist art in both America and in France. And on top of that, the expansion of global trade and, of course, colonialism made the arrival on a larger scale of antiquities from the Middle East, of porcelain from China and Japan, or African art and artifacts as well. So in my mind, I'm kind of thinking about chinoiserie, quote unquote, and that European and American appeal in the exotic. And remember those vases from the daughters of Edward Darley Boit. And after the end of the Civil War, the United States emerged as the first major non-European center of art demand. Early American industrialists, the quote-unquote robber barons, built mansions mimicking Versailles and bought European art, both old and new, at above market levels.
Bianca, quick interjection. Have you been watching 𝙗𝙧𝙧𝙀's Extraordinary Playlist?
Oh my god, yes.
Okay, so when her mom is like, she's a landscaper and she's trying to figure out, how she should build this guy's like garden.
Yeah.
And Zoe's like opening up this book. She's like, this is pretty, do this. And she's like, it's Versailles. She's like, so that's out of the budget, right?
Oh my god, I love it. I love it. It was so cute. If you're not watching 𝙗𝙧𝙧's Extraordinary Playlist, you
Really
should totally
out.
watch it. It's so sweet. I love it. The art markets of the 20th century were defined by the two world wars, and of course we also had the market crash of 29. However, modern and contemporary art, as well as the chase, which is something the woman also from Sotheby's talked about in the documentary, for record prices and the rise of the internet later on, reinvigorated the market by the very end of the century. Until 1945, the old masters, figures like Raphael, Da Vinci, Rembrandt, occupied the top price pyramid of art markets. But after the war, modern and contemporary art would replace this. Oxford Art writes, quote, "The rallying cry of the avant-garde to make it new resonated not only with critics and other art world insiders, but also with the ever larger segments of the general public, so that suddenly the demand for works by artists ranging from Monet to Cézanne to Picasso and Dalí seemed unlimited. For living artists, there was also unprecedented opportunities in the sale of multiples," which is what you were talking about, Gianna, as well, such as prints and bronzes or ceramics. American modern masters from Pollock to Warhol could claim their place in history largely because they fetched prices comparable, if not exceeding, to that of their European counterparts, end quote.
So, yeah, going back to the representative in the documentary from the auction house, Amy Capozzello, she, I have a lot, of different thoughts about her perspective.
Mm-hmm.
She was by far, I think, one of the most interesting people in the documentary and like made it super compelling to watch. But I think her distinctions in art, putting things in different categories, kind of goes along these lines of what you were just saying, Bianca, and how she makes this comment about there's this consensus in the art world by numerous amounts of people that when you look at something, there's this consensus that that is then a great thing.
Yes.
It's just interesting because we know that there are other reasons why buyers and consumers want to buy art. It's because they want more bang for their buck, and they're basically investing in artists that they know they can get away with not paying that much money for it now, and they are kind of betting on it being popular in the future, knowing that that artist is undervalued now as a way to, for their own personal financial gain.
Yeah, that was a super interesting point that she made, or I guess something to consider. This quote from her says, "Great things can tell you they're great. Even lay people can tell you they're great." I know. I was like,
yeah, that was like such a pivotal, we'll talk about that later,
Yeah.
but that was such a pivotal moment in the documentary.
yeah.
Yeah. And thinking about both the documentary and the idea of auction houses more broadly, I think many of us in the arts or otherwise are sort of familiar with those big name auction houses. It does make pretty interdisciplinary news when the Da Vinci broke the record with Salvador Mundi, or people like Banksy who shred their art at the auction, and that made it even more valuable. That was really big moment in
Global news, not just art news.
Yeah. And that piece was so interesting because his whole thing was this commentary on auction houses, but that act of destroying that art within an auction house just made it even more valuable. So I'm like, what is happening? I hate art.
I love that. I love it so much.
But like, what a way to like stick it to the man and get your money too. Like,
yeah, but then some other loser's just gonna flip the Banksy piece.
So we know the aesthetics of that large space, those big names and big buys that come in and really make it quite this spectacle. But we received a message from one of our darling art Pop-Tarts who actually works in a small auction house and had some positive things to say about it. Quoting our art Pop-Tart, "While I know there are serious moral or ethical issues with auction houses, from lack of appropriate repatriation post-World War II to theft of culture or essentially fencing illegal obtained antiquities, art just sitting in free ports, etc., I've been working at an auction house and wanted to share some of the more positive aspects of it. I work at a smaller auction house, so thankfully I haven't had to face any major ethical dilemmas yet, but I have been pleasantly surprised by a lot of my experience. I've been working in the decorative arts department, and it's awesome to see how much furniture, homeware, etc. that many would consider out of style are sold at an affordable price to collectors and just random people who stumble upon it. A few $100s for a nice oak dining table from the 1800s. Glad it's not decomposing on a street corner. Love that too. Furniture, lamps, chandeliers, ceramics, and china that are all lovely representations of style from their respective periods are preserved and sold at a reasonable price to someone who wants them and will use them. I also love seeing antiquities like Roman rings being sold for a couple hundred to someone who is so excited to own it and display it rather than have it sit in a museum basement forever. At smaller auction houses, there's also a lot of deals to be had. I've seen people pick up stunning canvases by lesser-known contemporary Canadian artists for under $1,000, and it's just great to know that's going to someone's house to be seen and enjoyed and to become a family heirloom."
That's amazing. I was just so excited to hear from this person, and we appreciate it so much. And Yeah, thank you for sending this our way. As we'll get into it, the documentary, of course, like made me feel a type of way about our world. But this notion that art can be affordable, that it is being taken care of, that it's fulfilling a purpose, whether that's in use, like the ring, or on display, like the painting, like both in thinking about that from the maker's perspective, but also from the perspective of the new caretaker, I think it's really lovely. And I think this in itself brings me joy and gives me a little light to all of the, I mean, I hate to say it, but yeah, negative things I felt after watching The Price of Everything. So our Art Pop Tart mentioned the word free ports. And if you are in our APT Facebook group, we hope that you saw PA Audrey posted an NPR podcast episode from Planet Money, where they talked about what free ports are. And until Audrey shared this with me, I really had no idea that these places even existed. It's for real, like Area 51 for the arts, but more depressing.
It's more depressing because Harrison Ford is not involved.
Oh my God. In an article from Sotheby's Institute of Art, they quote David Bellingham, the director of Sotheby's London Art Business Masters program. He says, quote, "If I had to choose one thing when thinking about one key art market factor of the 70s, it would be how art developed as an alternative investment asset. It was during the 70s that investors started looking at the benefits of collecting art, and art responded by, in fact, raising its prices. And this is where we can start thinking about free ports as an aid to art as an asset. Of course, we know art can be an asset outside of a free port, in a private gallery, in a home, etc. But because global trading has increased, this means that artworks are constantly crossing borders, and every country has a distinct legal framework for regulating the import and export of works of art. Sending works overseas means paying customs duties unless one can find a way to avoid it. In December 2014, Global Financial Integrity released a study claiming that capital outflows from the developing world to offshore financial centers totaled $991 billion in 2012. Where there have been, Gianna's making a sad face, where there have been the occasional cases of fraud, one involved the import of a Jean-Michel Basquiat painting, Hannibal, from London to the US. And interestingly, Basquiat is also discussed in the documentary as an artist that wasn't making it big in his own time. On customs forms, they claimed that the artwork inside the crate was worth $100, and therefore it was below the value for a duty payment. The painting was actually, quote unquote, worth $8 million and was part of an elaborate money laundering scheme that was set up by a Brazilian embezzler. However, an artsy article reads that these examples of fraud are few and far between that we know of, perhaps. And that's what's happening in free ports, is really an entirely legal loophole in the taxation system. Free ports were invented in 19th century Switzerland, originally to store grain and other agricultural products in transit. So while grain will not keep forever or an unlimited amount of time, more valuable commodities such as art could be stored for much longer. The essential aspect of the free port is, quote, the temporary exemption of taxes for an unlimited quantity of time. They are extremely secure storage facilities that are, quote unquote, offshore, where valuable commodities can be kept with the utmost discretion and no one can enter without an appointment. And these are all over the world. A free port is a storage facility that exists formally outside of the territorial jurisdiction of any country. In the era of offshore expansion in the late 20th century, tax loopholes and secrecy domains acquired a much greater significance in the global economy. And for art, the free port became the physical equivalent of a Swiss bank account. Invisible to tax authorities, foreign governments, and even the insurers of the artworks themselves, art could be stored there with complete anonymity and sold without any taxes being paid. So for me, it's very hard to understand why someone would purchase art just to keep it in storage. But as the documentary and the NPR podcast pointed out, art is now an asset that is similar to that of real estate. An Artsy article reads, quote, "If you are a collector of fine art, you want to be able to see and appreciate what you own. But if you are a speculator, all you need is private and secure storage, since you are betting that the work is going to increase in value. So the free port is the perfect place to park your speculative art purchases because they cannot be traced to you and no government can tax you on these assets." And this is an idea also mentioned in the documentary about flipping pieces of art similar to the way that people flip houses.
That's
It's
a lot to
wild.
process. I will
It
say
is.
the NPR podcast, Planet Money, is really, really short. And she takes us through it really fast and really seamlessly. So definitely give that a listen. It was really interesting when the podcast host from NPR was actually at a free port in Delaware.
Yeah, because Delaware has very interesting tax laws.
She only saw one piece of art because everything else was in these crates and in these boxes and had a very, Area 51 kind of vibe to it.
Yeah. I really want to try to go. I think that would be really cool to make an appointment and see what I can find.
Oh my gosh, you totally should. Okay, everyone. So we are going to take a little break. And when we come back, we are going to discuss the price of everything and bring on our special surprise guest, Boy of APT and financial correspondent, 𝙗𝙗𝙧𝙚𝙗.
Welcome back, everybody. I am so excited to have our first session with a Boy of APT, and now I am officially hiring him as our APT financial correspondent. You can add that to your resume. You're welcome. Hi, 𝙗𝙗𝙧𝙚. I'm so glad you're here.
Hello. Glad to be here.
Oh my gosh. Yes. First boyfriend of APT on the pod. Hi. Thanks for being here. So coincidentally, 𝙗𝙗𝙧𝙚 was just reading a book called The $1 Billion Whale by Bradley Hope and Tom Wright. And this book discusses a Malaysian financier turned international criminal who has been
Nice.
involved in a lot of pop culture and a lot of arts culture for the good and for the shady. So having produced Wolf of Wall Street and having used art to launder money, and has been known to throw very lavish parties with well-known celebrities, 𝙗𝙗𝙧𝙚 was telling me about this book that he just finished, and I thought it was just perfect timing. So,
I love it.
yeah, I love a good finance crossover. It's
There
like
you
our
go.
two worlds merging together.
It is.
Yes.
It's so nice, though.
Yes, I am glad to be here. Just a quick shout out to my mom and dad who are listening. I have made it.
Hi, 𝙗𝙗𝙧𝙚's mom and dad.
I am famous.
You are famous. 𝙗𝙗𝙧𝙚, can you give us an overview of the book? Tell us what it's all about. I've never even heard of it, so I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is titled The $1 Billion Whale, and then the long title is The Man Who Fooled Wall Street, Hollywood, and the World. Basically, a synopsis of the book. is the common denominator between Leonardo DiCaprio, Alicia Keys, Van Gogh, the Wolf of Wall Street, the Saudi royalty, Goldman Sachs, money laundering, and Malaysia in common is Joe Low.
And Joe Low is the main figure we're talking about in this book.
Yes, Joe Low is the main character of the book. He orchestrated basically the biggest money heist in history, and is such an amazing study for international finance enthusiasts out there. I'm sure there's a lot of you guys. Yeah,
the underground APT following.
Yeah, so the Malaysian government lost about $12 billion, and that might not seem a lot to the U.S., but in Malaysian terms, I mean, Malaysia's economy is as big as Oklahoma, so it's a lot of money. So Joe Low was born and raised in Penang, Malaysia. And he was born to a pretty wealthy family, Chinese family, I should say, in Penang. And he eventually went to go to the University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton School of Business. I believe he studied finance. And he was a party goer ever since he, in his college years. And he would throw all these lavish parties. And apparently one time he threw a party. He went to school with Ivanka Trump, surprise, surprise, and he was trying to be famous, get Ivanka to come to his party, and eventually she said no. And so he was making connections with a lot of influential people in this arena, and he found this influential, I should say, Arab connection. Joe Low eventually met the Malaysian Prime Minister at that time, Najib Razak, and promised Arab investment in Malaysia to boost his popularity. They brokered a deal where they would build this investment company called One Malaysia Development Berhad. And I'm sure some of you have read this in the news somewhere about this 1MDB scandal. This whole deal was a fraud in its founding, because Petro Saudi didn't really have real assets to tie to its name. They just basically used the name and their prints as a backing. Initially, it was going to be a 50-50 joint venture with Petro Saudi, but it turned out that the 1MDB funded the money first into an offshore bank account, I should say, at British Virgin Islands. And that money eventually was increased over the years, over the course of, I want to say, 10 years. So the money was laundered through multiple offshore accounts and spent on lavish parties with high-profile actors like Leonardo DiCaprio, Miranda Kerr, who he dated for a bit actually, Jamie Foxx, Alicia Keys, Paris Hilton, Kanye West, and Kim Kardashian, to name a few. The money was spent on expensive New York real estate, the making of The Wolf of Wall Street, Dumb and Dumber 2, and Daddy's Home. And of course, last but not least, famous paintings worth $137 million through art auctions.
What?
I'm honestly surprised it's not more. Like, compared to some of the figures that we were looking at earlier, Bianca, with just like a painting going for what would we say, like 400 million or something?
Well, that's
that was like the
Salvador
record.
Mundi is exceptional, but
yeah, for sure. But
so
when I think about collective artwork only being around like 100 million, I'm surprised it's not a little bit more.
Yes, I mean, I guess in terms of a Malaysian scale, reading this, it's just wow. That's a lot of money. But I guess
that's also interesting, maybe something to like look into.
Yes.
Do we know what the paintings were?
Yes, so among the paintings, glad you asked, among the paintings that fell into the hands of Joe Low was a Van Gogh drawing, 2 Monet paintings, and a piece by Picasso, which Gianna said he can have that, through the art...
I did.
through the art auction company Christie's and Sotheby's. And I have a article from artsy.net that I would like to read. This article talks about basically the whole thing with Joe Low and the 1MDB scandal, but I just like this short clip from that talks about the arts that he bought just in this one year. So, quote, Low bought And sorry for butchering the names. I'm going to say it again. Jenna's probably going to stare at me. So, Lowe bought La Maison de Vincent et Arles, 1888, by Vincent van Gogh for $5.5 million. And Pablo Picasso's Tête de Femme, 1935, for $39.9 million at the equivalent sale at Sotheby's one day later. He ended the year with 2-work private sale at Christie's on December 20th, where he purchased Basquiat's. Oh man, Basquiat's head of.
It sounds like you're saying squat.
I'm bad. Basquiat's head of a madman, 1982, for $12 million. And then there were the works purchased from S&S Fine Art, a company associated with the auction. Among them, Claude Monet's 1808, which Lowe bought for $35 million in December 2013 and had promptly shipped to Geneva Freeport. He also snapped up 5 works by Liechtenstein, Andy Warhol, and Yves Klein from an unnamed art dealing outfit for more than $18 million. Lowe continued his buying spree into 2014, capping it with the purchase of Monet's small oil painting bought at Sotheby's in London. It set him back $57.5 million, and while many of the works were going to Freeport, some had other destinations. Lowe had decided to give a few works, Basquiat, the $3.2 million Picasso, along with Diane Arbus photo purchased for $750,000, all to one person. And it says, quote, "Dear Leonardo DiCaprio, read the handwritten note from Lowe's associate Eric Tan that came with the Picasso. Happy belated birthday. This gift is for you." End quote.
Oh my God.
I know. That is crazy. He can just...
Well, I know that Leonardo DiCaprio, I know he's been interested in the arts for a while because he does a lot of art and environmental collaboration. So that's really interesting.
Right, yes. So based on reading this book and really how this book portrays him is that feels like Jolo was the good guy, right? One of the good celebrities. So he definitely partied with Jolo. He went for all these parties. But once the Department of Justice in the United States and, the Malaysian government eventually spoke up about the corruptions and the scandals, Leo basically distanced himself. And you're right, Bianca. Leo did do all these auctions because of environmental reasons, and he literally had a good thing. Like he for the production company that funded The Wolf of Wall Street, that was funded 100% by Joe Lowe. He didn't want the old producing companies to basically monopolize the industry, and he wanted a new player so that the artistic part of movie making could be told. And I think they spent
Yeah, I mean, not to cut you off, but Wolf of Wall Street was successful in that. Like, it's a shame that the money that we know of provided by Jolo was from other places of corruption, and that's not okay. But the idea was to do something different and not support, these billion-dollar production companies anymore, and find a better way of kind of going about that. Was that Leonardo's intent?
Just the irony of it all too. Can you believe that this backer of the movie is making a movie about his financial situation?
No,
right.
That is, I know the
Did it
irony.
not give him so much anxiety? I'm producing a movie about corrupt people in finance.
The irony was just, I know. And Leo talked about how I think the movie spent about $100 million just in spending, and how if we went to a big producer, there's no way they're gonna go that high. And they actually, at the start of the movie, I don't know if you remember watching it, Jordan Belfort, the main character, crashed a Lamborghini, brand new Lamborghini actually. And if it was, they were talking about how if it was a big producer, they would say, hey, get a replica. We're not going to crash a brand new Lamborghini.
But it was.
But it was a brand new Lamborghini just because Jolo was like, do it.
So where is Jolo now?
Yes, glad you asked. So
Ooh, riveting content.
the U.S. Department of Justice has, I think I want to say in 2016, opened up an investigation and charged Joe Low for money laundering. And he's now actually hiding in Macau, China, in that region. And we don't know specifically where, although no one is sure, who is helping him. The Chinese officials, like I say, the Chinese government has not been cooperating well with the U.S. and Malaysian authorities. And he still has millions and millions of dollars with him, although that is depleting tremendously.
I want them to make a movie about this. Like, I want them to make a movie
yes,
about him and Leo and all the celebrities and like the real life kind of Gatsby parties and then the art of it all. Well, Theben, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and telling us about this whole book and this story. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. I had fun talking about it. I hope I didn't spend too much time talking about it, and I definitely butchered a lot of names there. So please edit out whatever is being butchered.
No, this is perfect.
How do you feel now that you've been on Art Pop Talk, Theben?
Man, I feel
Seeing
the
other
good.
side, the behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's I'm right now sitting at APT HQ. Pretty cool setup. Yeah, I feel good.
All right, so we are going to take another little break, and when we come back, we are going to end our episode with a discussion on the price of everything. Welcome back, everyone, to this part 3 of our financial and art market episode. That was really fun to have Theben on.
I know. I'm so glad he was
I
here.
feel like
and it worked out like perfectly for him to be reading that book coincidentally and then come on and talk about it.
I know.
It's good to talk about all those different connections in our world and careers, and it sometimes seems like you and Theben have like 180 careers, but in fact we're learning today that they're so tied to one another.
Yeah, for sure. It's what it's all about, man. So with that being said, let's just get into the documentary, The Price of Everything. I think we should just start with initial thoughts.
I was really moved by the documentary in both negative and positive ways. I finished the documentary crying a whole lot. I got really angry during the course of the documentary. I have this like turmoil towards Jeff Koons, and I think one of the like positive things about the documentary is that I feel okay about liking Jeff Koons. And I know it's weird, and I totally understand why people critique him and have problems with him and things like that, but I actually found his position in the documentary strangely brilliant in this, I don't want to say corrupt, but tangled enterprise, and I thoroughly enjoyed everything that Jeff Koons had to say, and he's not apologetic about it. Like, he is who he is, and I think that there's something about him that is still very brilliant, even in a very like critical way, which again, I completely understand that other people take issue with that, but I actually surprisingly loved his contribution to the film.
I also feel sometimes a lot better when I hear other artists' perspectives on Jeff Koons, and I am obsessed with Marilyn Minter. I
could not wait to talk to you about this because I knew you were gonna like Marilyn.
Oh my god.
And also,
love her.
Not to cut you off, but a lot of the artists in the documentary are people that we have also been referring back to, especially in that episode about, or those 2 episodes about art in your home and celebrity art, and thinking about Koons, Minter, Damien Hirst, being in that precise moment in time where they are propelled through the art market.
Yeah. The brutal honesty of the documentary is definitely the hardest thing about watching it, but it's also the best thing about it at the same time. This documentary is confrontation at its finest, and if you are a very passive person, brace yourself, because you will find yourself agreeing and disagreeing 1 second, and then finding something like cringy and then like not cringy at the same second. You know, it'd be like, oh wait, no, that actually makes sense. You know, as cringy as the kind of surface level concept of something like Jeff Koons Studios, like, you know, as an outsider, you can kind of see the controversies of that. You see the controversies of him as a person, perhaps. But you know, it was funny because I was actually talking to Mom about this. Mom watched this documentary with me. And, you know, we got to the part where we were going through Koons Studio and him talking about, you know, having these masterful painters behind him flipping through these pages of like Renaissance art and then going in and painting it exactly. And his description was bold, albeit, but the fact that, you know, this is him basically saying that facilitating this is basically just the same thing as if I were to paint it and sit here and do this myself. It's just that I want to produce this amount of art in a year. And if I sit there and if I do this, I'm not able to do it. And, you know, Mom thought that was very bold and abrasive of him, but it was, it just goes back to things that we have said on the pod. Like, Koons Studio is not a new concept. And, you know, I use the examples of master painters didn't always paint those big ass paintings like you think they do.
Yeah, no, Gianna, to your point, many of the old masters had workshops and studios, but this is something I've written about in my thesis and we've kind of brought up on the show early on in like the second episode. Judy Chicago, 𝙗𝙖𝙧𝙚𝙚, they have studios and they have all these people around them, and Jeff has never lied to us saying that he's always the only one making it, and he does allow cameras and things like that into his studio. And I think that even the people that work for him, you know, we've known people, Gianna, you've known people who have worked in Koons' studio, and it's just, it's interesting that he is upfront about it, I guess. You know,
like, I think a good way to look about a good way to look at Koons Studios, or to talk about that kind of art and to talk about that kind of practice, is that is just one of many different types of forms of art, and that's okay if that isn't your cup of tea. You can go and you can find art being made in other different ways. Like, this is just one part of that. And I think something that I always just find comforting in that kind of part of art being manufactured through the studio is when I think about how many people he is employing. And I don't know, I think about that a lot when I think about places like Meow Wolf or other kind of like experiential, like, you know, the way that I feel about it is, okay, well, like, look at how many people like this kind of art institution is able to employ, and that makes me feel a lot better about it.
And also the case, you know, we're obviously not hired by Jeff Koons, and I don't know the ins and outs of the people that work for him, but in many of those situations, when you work for a type of studio or you are part of an arts collective like Meow Wolf, you are given health insurance, you are given benefits, you are given a salary, and that is also not often a regular guarantee with singular professional working artists. And so that is
it's a huge part of it, and that is to be greatly considered, I think, before critiquing that kind of studio environment. But the ways they structured the documentary to me was kind of from these three main perspectives. You first have the auction house, which kind of has more of that realist, you know, Sotheby's, Christie's, you know, perspective of it. And then you have the artist who perhaps is is also a realist in a lot of ways, but then is also a little bit of a romantic. And you have people that straddle those lines, such as Larry Poons and Marilyn Minter. And then we have the collector, who was also straddling these lines between being a realist about art, using it as a, financial and investment opportunity, but also genuinely really has insightful opinions about the work that he's collecting. And our main collector in the documentary was Stefan Edlis. Of course, these are conflicting opinions within these categories that don't make this conversation about the art market so like cut and dry, because when you throw, like we just talked about, Jeff Koons into the mix, who is thinking differently than Poons, I don't know, that's when things got interesting in the documentary for me.
So I want to talk about Larry Poons because I feel like I'm going to cry just thinking about the sweetness of him. But I wanted to add maybe, Gianna, a fourth perspective, which is not as common a thread throughout the documentary, but from that of the scholar or the museum. And I was extremely moved by Alexander Nemerov, who is an art historian, a scholar, a poet, who is the one that is guiding you kind of through I think it's the Frick collection, and then he goes on to the roof, and that's where he sees Jeff Koons' diamond, and gives this like very profound speech about consumption and materiality and pop culture and art. And while I love all of those things about pop art, and that's what makes it pop art, the documentary led me down this path of being so angry and upset about the realities of money and auction houses and the art market, and then to hear Alexander give this critique of all things pop culture and high-end kind of art market was really, really moving, I thought. Just to add another kind of perspective to your big three.
No, for sure. And that's so, I don't know, that's going to be really important, because I think maybe we should just get into that pivotal moment in the documentary where we were really showed those conflicting opinions from artists and from auction house, and how the museum is the like integral like line between those two perspectives. So the artists Gerhard Richter and Sabine Richter say in the documentary, museums are democratic, meaning, if you are poor, if you are rich, it doesn't matter. Everybody is equal when they get into the space. And Gerhard Richter prefers and would ideally prefer all of his works to be in a museum space, and that's important, and we need to like understand that when consuming his work. With this kind of sense of democracy in museums, although I do agree with that statement, on the other kind of realistic side of that, as much as there is a better possibility of this, everybody getting to experience that art over being in a private collection or a tax-exempt storage facility, we still know that this isn't entirely true. Even though the space itself is equal, the act of getting into the museum as a viewer or as an artist is not always equal. Then we have Sotheby's Amy Capozzello, whose opposing opinion to Richter's own thoughts about his own work was that it is so democratic and socialist of him to avoid rich people who want to buy his work.
And Gianna, that's a really fantastic point. I just want to read another quote from Amy. One of the producers behind the scenes asked, "Do you hope the piece finds the world of someone who can live up to it?" Because that's when Amy is saying, great things tell you they're great. Even lay people can tell you they're great. And she poses this as a moral question. And that's when she says museums are great, but if you have too many of them, then they'll never come up and see the light of day. And at first I was getting really upset at her argument, but then she comes back with this point that that's true. Half of a museum's collection is in storage. And then going back to the Art Pop-Tart, who sent us some information about her auction house, that, yeah, some objects get put into storage even when they're bought by good people, like, or good, you know, good institutions, perhaps like a museum, and they're never appreciated.
Yeah.
But then also, Gianna, you have a really great point about this is so fascinating.
And this
like,
is where
the space, the physical indoor space of a museum, yes, is socialist and democratic. But as we've been saying throughout this year on the podcast, museums as an institution, as a career move, are in fact incredibly unequal and discriminate against different people. Of course, collections, we know that museum collections have less objects by women, by people of color. And then that also led me to the point about, throughout the whole documentary, I think there was a woman artist of color, and she was maybe the only person of color in almost the entire documentary.
Yeah, and so in Amy's argument, there were things that pulled me back around to really be like, okay, I understand where you're coming from. And I think it can be really easy to like hate on Sotheby's in this documentary, and don't be like fooled by that, because she does say very insightful things. And I like that she points out the hypocrisies of both auction houses and museums, but I don't like throwing back the idea of democracy and like socialism. Like, I think that's a very like thin argument. And her terminology and just using the word like lay people just also reinforces this very kind of classist perspective that I didn't think was necessary. But
Absolutely.
So it's like, I agree with both parties and I don't agree with both parties. And it's more complex than that. Artists, museums, and auction houses are all related, and they all rely on one another. And so do the patron, and so do the viewers. So like I said, I was really upset when I watched it, but I was able to sit with it for a few days before recording this. And I feel a little bit not more at ease, because of course there are problems in our system that allow for a work of art to have an arbitrary price tag that nobody else can afford, that sits in storage, that, you know, to me, that's pretty harmful to our culture. But in a way, I am comforted by a lot of the people that they did bring on to the documentary. I think that I was probably most surprised by Jerry Saltz, the art critic, and I was kind of expecting not to like him, but he made some like really, really fascinating and very practical points about how we all, in a terrible way, like rely on each other. And I don't know, the complexity of the documentary just reflected my own complexities and these like larger questions that I've been having lately about my place in the art world. And as, like I said, as problematic and as many things as there are to fix and to discuss, I am glad to see that that turmoil that I am internally feeling is actually being reflected, and it's kind of like cyclical, these emotions that I have about how to navigate the art world. And I just will also be forever interested in the fact that this was a slow buildup in history to how, you know, auction houses and how the art market functions in this way, but how pivotal the 1960s and the 1970s were for these monumentous auctions to just shift the art market landscape. And the fact that artists like Poons and like Rosenquist are so involved with that, and how pop art was pivotal in being a part of that huge shift. I also
Right. I loved that they talked about the skull auction.
Yes.
And when you see Rauschenberg saying he was working his ass off to make you, the collector, that profit. And then the skull turns around and
Whoa, whoa,
says,
whoa.
well, look at what I just did for you.
whoa.
And I was like,
I know.
what's happening?
But it is so crazy. Is it at Art Basel or one of the auctions that they were talking about where they were saying artist gets 50%? So it is an equal partnership. Artist gets 50, auction house gets 50, and I found that very interesting.
Yeah.
I did
But then until it gets flipped.
and then none of those people are seeing that money. Then it's just in the hands of the collector.
Right.
And I really liked how they also showed artists' reactions to that. I really also appreciated the ways in which the documentary talked about Basquiat's work. And I liked how that conversation started with George Condo, a friend and fellow artist who was up and coming around the same time as Jean-Michel. And I don't know, both just kind of getting recognized in the 1970s. It just was really, like, I don't know, felt important to talk about. I have always felt this really uncomfortable consumption of Basquiat's work from the moment I've just learned about it in high school and like art history, because when you don't have the vocabulary, you know, I could never quite put my finger on it, but like having that privilege to see his artwork in person and overhearing like side conversations about his work in galleries and just how it's talked about and written about in history, I've felt like there's always been this sense of tokenism around Basquiat. And I really appreciated how, you know, George Condo like pointed that out and talked about it, and then talked about how that was exactly what was happening, because people were buying his art at that time knowing that it was undervalued, knowing and hoping and betting on the fact that in the future then that's when they could you know, bank on their investment doubling and and rising. So I think the art market being so pivotal at that time, it was really important to point out Basquiat's work, and it could have been easily like not talked about. So I was glad at least there was some attention put on that and just the collectability of Basquiat's work.
Yeah. And now I'm really interested to see what happens to Larry Poons's artwork, and maybe that's where we can kind of wrap up the discussion for today. But I just was constantly bawling my eyes out over Poons, and I just can't express how much admiration I have for him as a person, not just as an artist, but how I think what we learned from this documentary is that people, in the way our cultures and governments function right now, they are going to live their lives with what they have, and maybe that's a tough reality that I need to like personally face. And for Larry Poons to stick up so much for what he believes in and what he wants to do with his art, and what his art not only means to him but to other people, was so incredible. And there's a quote I have from him where he says, "There are no rules about what is going to be good and bad. Art doesn't give a shit. It never has." And I think that's the price of everything, in kind of wrapped up in a quote.
This has just been an awesome episode, and I know that it was going to be like really challenging for us to go into. You know, this is just one of like those ugly like realities that you sometimes like don't want to face, and you don't want to like go down the dark twisty hole of uncovering all these stories, but they are really important and they're a part of it. And you know, we're going to continue to talk about that side of the art world, and hopefully have that be a normal part of our weekly conversations.
I think that's one thing that I've also been thinking about, is not that I feel lied to, but after watching the documentary, I just feel like from the art historical museum kind of perspective, I felt such a complete and like utter disassociation to what the documentary was showing me. And I kept thinking about that like TikTok audio that's like, somebody lied to her. But I felt like lied to. Even though in the back of my mind, I think those of us in the arts world, and of course beyond, understand that the art market is just a weird kind of functional system of the visual arts. But it was pretty, I don't know, it was pretty earth-shattering to kind of uncover such a truth that is not even denying its existence.
Yeah, and from just the artist perspective too, you know, when we were first discussing this, I thought of that hypothetical example from She's Gotta Have It, where in the second episode, she sells this painting, or is going to sell this painting or work of art to a collector who's buying up all this art. And then there's this little party that these collectors have for these artists, that they're going to collect all their work. And all these artists are like, this is great, you know, this is going to pay for my vacation, whatever. And then Nola is like, wait, what's going on? Like, I made this art because I want it out in the world. I don't want this art to just sit in a private collection forever. You know, a girl can only hope and dream to even be presented into that situation. To be given the option, at least, it would be nice for me. But, you know, would I say no and have that full control over my artwork and try to put it out in the world? Or also do I sell it to the collector? And each situation is different, and girls gotta eat. And at the end of the day, you have to survive and provide for yourself.
Well, thank you guys so much for listening. I really hope we can carry on the conversation. There's just so much more to say, especially about the documentary. If you're in our Facebook group, definitely let us know what you thought about it. I know this episode is really long, so thanks for sticking it through. Don't forget that you can sign up for our monthly newsletter at artpoptalk.com, and you'll be getting a new email from us next Tuesday with all of February's upcoming content. And if you wanted to take time to rate us and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, that would be pretty awesome as well. So with that, we will talk to you on Tuesday. Bye everyone. Art Pop Talk's production assistant is Audrey Kaminsky. Music and sounds by Josh Turner. Photography is by Adrian Turner. And our graphic designer is Sid Hammond.